I didn't argue when she said it. That's the part people don't expect. They expect yelling, tears, maybe a slammed door or a broken plate. But when my daughter-in-law stood in my kitchen and announced, like she was reading off a grocery list, that she planned to sell my car, I just smiled. Not a big smile, just enough. The kind of smile that makes someone uncomfortable because they can't read it. It was a Tuesday, gray outside, the kind of quiet that settles into your bones. I had just come home with the last box from my classroom, 42 years of teaching stuffed into cardboard. Old photos, handwritten thank you notes, a chipped mug that said "World's Okayest Teacher," a joke from a student who knew me too well. Retirement had finally arrived. I was sorting papers at the dining table when the front door opened without a knock. No greeting, no hello, just heels clicking sharp against tile. Lydia walked in like the house already belonged to her. She wore a fitted blazer and that polished smile she used when she wanted control. Hair pulled tight, lips neutral, eyes cold. The kind of look that measured value, what something was worth and how fast it could be turned into cash. She didn't sit. She crossed her arms and said, "I've decided I'm going to sell your car. You don't really need it anymore." Just like that. My car? The one I bought after years of saving? The one that carried groceries, children, grief, and freedom? I folded a document slowly. "I'm retired now," she continued, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. "Driving isn't safe at your age, and honestly, Marcus and I could really use that money. We're trying to upgrade our place." She said upgrade the way people say deserve. I looked at her, really looked, at the woman who married my son and somehow convinced him that love meant obedience, that family meant access, that my life, my things, my time were now part of her plans. I felt something twist in my chest, but instead of fighting, I smiled, a small one. Lydia frowned. "Did you hear me?" "I heard you," I said. My voice surprised even me. Calm, steady, perfectly. "Good," she said, already reaching for her phone. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning for the keys. I already have a buyer." She turned and left without waiting for a response. The door clicked shut. The house felt smaller after that. I stood there surrounded by boxes and silence and let the truth settle in. She thought I was finished. She thought I was weak. She thought I had nothing left. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had been quietly holding on to something for a very long time. An old promise, a private decision, and a final lesson I never planned to teach. By morning, my car would be gone, but not for the reason she imagined. The night after Lydia left, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slow circles above me, the faint hum sounding louder than it should have. Retirement is supposed to feel like relief, like a long exhale. Instead, it felt like someone had shut off the noise of my life so abruptly my ears were still ringing. I got up around 2 a.m. Old habit. 40 years of waking before the sun doesn't disappear just because the alarm clock does. I padded into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter like I used to during late grading nights. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Marcus used to fill this place with noise when he was younger. Music too loud, shoes kicked off wherever, questions shouted from room to room. Now the walls just held memories. They didn't speak anymore. I carried my water to the living room and sat among the boxes from school. One tipped over when I nudged it with my foot. Papers spilled out. Drawings, thank you notes, essays from kids who'd grown up and probably forgotten my name by now. One paper slid free. It was from a third grader years back, big crooked letters in purple marker. You taught me to read when I thought I was dumb. I pressed my lips together. Funny how strangers remember your kindness longer than your own family remembers your sacrifice. I stacked the papers back into the box and taped it shut. Neat. Controlled. That's how I survived most things, by staying composed while the world tried to take pieces off me. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Lydia told me you talked about selling the car. We'll discuss tomorrow. We'll discuss. Like I was a coworker who missed a meeting, not his son. I didn't reply. I went into the garage instead. The car sat there under the dim overhead light, silver paint dulled by years of sun but still solid, dependable. I ran my hand along the hood like I always did after a long drive. This car had carried me through grief, through rainstorms and panic attacks, and nights I wasn't sure I could make it home without pulling over to cry. And tomorrow, someone else thought they could just take it. I unlocked the driver's door and sat inside. The smell was familiar. Old upholstery, faint coffee, a hint of lemon cleaner. I rested my forehead on the steering wheel and let myself feel it. Not anger, clarity. Lydia didn't want the car. She wanted control. And Marcus, God help him, had let himself become a messenger instead of his son. I went back inside and opened the hallway closet. Behind winter coats and boxes of old lesson plans sat a small, plain metal lockbox. No label, no decoration, just weight. I didn't open it yet. I wasn't ready. At sunrise, I made coffee and watched light spill across the kitchen floor. The world went on, unaware that something inside me had shifted. At 9:30, I showered, dressed, and brushed my hair with care. I chose a simple blouse and slacks, nothing dramatic. If this was going to be a turning point, I wasn't going to dress like a storm. At exactly 10 o'clock, I heard a car pull up outside. Voices. Footsteps. I didn't move, because sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is wait. And sometimes the quiet before the door opens is louder than any argument that comes after. The knock came sharp and impatient. 3 raps, too loud for a morning, too familiar. I opened the door slowly. Marcus stood there, with Lydia just behind his shoulder, half hidden but very much present, like a voice waiting to interrupt. My son looked tired. His tie was loose. His eyes avoided mine for half a second too long. That half second told me everything. "Mom," he said, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath since the car ride over, "we need to talk." I stepped aside and let them in. Lydia walked straight past me toward the living room like she'd memorized the layout. She perched on the edge of the sofa, phone already in hand, legs crossed, jaw tight. Marcus stayed standing. "You didn't answer my text." "I saw it." "So where are the keys?" There it was. No good morning, no how are you holding up, just straight to the transaction. "I won't be giving you the keys," I said. Lydia let out a sharp laugh. "Don't do this today." "Do what?" "Act confused," she snapped. "We already talked about this. You agreed." I turned to Marcus. "Did I agree?" He shifted his weight. "You didn't say no." I nodded slowly. Not saying no isn't the same as saying yes. Silence filled the room like thick fog. Lydia stood up. "Look, this doesn't have to be dramatic. The buyer's waiting. We just need the keys. You don't even drive that much anymore." "That's not true." "When was the last time you went anywhere that wasn't the grocery store?" she asked. I met her gaze. Yesterday. She blinked. Where? Nowhere you need to know about. Marcus rubbed his forehead. Mom, we're just trying to help. You don't need a car sitting around. It's practical. Practical. That word again. Practical for who? I asked. For us, Lydia said without missing a beat, then quickly added, for the family. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pain exactly, recognition. This wasn't concern, it was entitlement. I raised you to ask, I said to Marcus quietly, not assume. He looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment I saw confusion flicker across his face, like he was realizing, too late, that something had gone wrong. But Lydia stepped in before the moment could breathe. Emily, she said, lowering her voice like she was speaking to a difficult child, you're being stubborn. This is what responsible adults do. You adjust, you let go. I smiled again, not the polite one, the calm one. The car won't be sold today. Her face hardened. Then we'll come back with paperwork. You can bring whatever you like. Marcus stared at me. Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I walked past him to the door and opened it. I think you should leave now. Lydia's mouth fell open. Excuse me? I'm tired and I don't want company. Marcus hesitated. We'll talk later. Yes, I said softly. We will. They left without another word. I closed the door and leaned my back against it, breathing in slowly. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I walked back to the hallway closet, knelt down and pulled out the metal lockbox. This time, I opened it. Inside were documents, old ones, new ones, proofs and plans and a life Lydia never bothered to imagine. I touched the top paper gently. Not yet, I whispered to myself, but soon, very soon. By noon, the neighborhood knew something was wrong. I could feel it in the way the mailman lingered, and how Mrs. Calder from across the street waved but didn't smile. Word travels fast when a woman like Lydia doesn't get what she wants. I made lunch. I didn't eat. Soup simmered on the stove while my mind replayed the morning, Marcus's face, the way he'd looked at me like I was a problem to solve instead of a person to understand. That look hurt more than Lydia's sharp tongue ever could. Around 2 o'clock, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a message appeared. Hello, this is Brent from Cashway Auto Buyers. I was scheduled to pick up a vehicle today, but there seems to be some confusion. Please call me back. So she'd already moved forward. Without permission, without ownership, without respect. That was the moment I understood something clearly. This wasn't about one car. It was a test, and if I failed it, the next thing to go wouldn't be metal and tires. It would be my house, my independence, my voice. I turned off the stove. Then I went to the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Hi, I said when the voice answered. It's me. I need to update some documents. A pause, then warmth. Of course. When can you come in? Today. By 4, I was sitting in a quiet office that smelled faintly of paper and old coffee. I didn't rush. I didn't explain more than necessary. I simply said, I want everything clear, clean, protected. He nodded like he'd heard this before, because he had. When I got home, the sun was starting to dip. Shadows stretched long across the driveway, stopping right where my car sat. Still mine. For now. At 7:30, Marcus called. Mom, he said carefully, Lydia's upset. I imagine she is. She thinks you're doing this to punish her. I'm doing this to protect myself. That's not how she sees it. I exhaled slowly. Marcus, when did you stop seeing it? Silence. I just want everyone to be okay, he finally said. So do I, but not at the cost of my dignity. She says you're overreacting. I almost laughed. That woman walked into my home and decided what parts of my life she could sell. That's not concern, that's control. She's under a lot of stress. So was I when I raised you alone, I said gently, but I never treated anyone like property. He didn't answer. Think about that, and I ended the call. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened the lockbox again. This time, I read every page, and I made a decision that would change everything. Because if Lydia wanted a lesson, there was a moment that night, just one, where I almost folded. I was standing in the hallway, lights off, the house lit only by the glow from the street lamp outside. Shadows stretched across the walls, long and thin like they were listening. My phone sat in my hand, warm from my grip. Marcus's name hovered on the screen. I thought about calling him, about apologizing, about saying, "Fine, do whatever you want, just don't shut me out." That's how mothers lose themselves, not all at once, piece by piece. I remembered another night, years ago, when Marcus was 8 and running a fever so high I stayed up counting his breaths. I didn't sleep for 36 hours straight. I'd whispered promises into his hair, promises I kept even when it cost me everything. Back then, no one told me I was overreacting. I lowered the phone. If I called now, it wouldn't be love. It would be surrender. Instead, I walked back to the living room and sat down with the lockbox one more time. I pulled out a folded letter, edges worn soft with age, a promise made to myself a long time ago. Never let anyone convince you that you're small just because you're quiet. I slept that night, deeply, like my body finally believed I was safe. The next morning, my car was gone. Not stolen. Gone because I moved it. I woke early, drove it somewhere quiet, somewhere intentional, parked it carefully, locked it, and walked away. By 10, my phone was blowing up. Missed calls, texts, voicemails stacked like accusations. "Where is it? You can't do this. This is embarrassing. Marcus is furious." I didn't respond. At noon, there was pounding at the door. Not knocking, pounding. I didn't open it. Lydia's voice sliced through the wood. "You think you're clever? You think this is funny?" I stood in the kitchen, calm as still water. "Open the door," she yelled. "We are family." Family. The word sounded hollow coming from her mouth. When she finally left, the silence felt earned. That afternoon, I made one last phone call, not to Marcus, not to argue, not to explain, to someone who truly needed what Lydia thought she deserved. And as I hung up, I realized something that made my chest ache and lift at the same time. I wasn't taking revenge. I was choosing where my kindness belonged, and that choice, that was mine alone. I waited until the house was quiet again. No pounding, no shouting, no phones vibrating like nervous insects. Then I picked up my purse and left. The drive was short, but heavy. I followed streets I'd driven 100 times, past places that carried memories. Marcus's old school, the library where I spent summers hiding from heat and bills, the diner where my husband and I once shared fries because it was all we could afford. I parked in front of a small, worn duplex on the edge of town. The paint was peeling. The steps leaned a little to the left. Wind chimes made from mismatched keys clinked softly near the door. I sat in the car for a second, steadying myself. Then I knocked. The door opened slowly. Mrs. Hale, she said, eyes wide with surprise. Is everything okay? Claire Hale, one of my former students, sharp mind, soft heart. Life hadn't been kind to her, but she'd never once complained. I hope I'm not interrupting, I said. She stepped aside immediately. Never, please come in. The living room was small, clean but tired, toys neatly stacked in one corner, a wheelchair near the couch. Her son, Eli, smiled when he saw me. "Hi, Miss R," he said proudly. I smiled back. "Hi, superstar." Claire brought me tea she probably couldn't afford to offer and sat across from me, hands folded nervously. "What's going on?" she asked. I took a breath. "I want to ask you something, and before you say no, I want you to listen." She nodded. "Do you still take 3 buses to get Eli to therapy?" Her face fell a little. "Yes, every day." "And work?" "I clean offices at night. I do what I can." I reached into my purse and set the car keys on the table between us. Her eyes locked onto them. "I want you to have my car," I said. The room went silent. Claire shook her head instantly. "No, I can't. That's too much." "It's exactly enough," I said gently. "You need it. I don't." "That's not true." "It is," I replied. "What I need now is to know my kindness is going somewhere it matters." Tears welled in her eyes. "Why me?" I thought of Lydia, of her spreadsheets, of her plans. "Because you never asked for anything," I said, "and because when people show you who they are, you believe them." Claire covered her mouth, shaking. I slid the keys closer. "You don't owe me anything," I said. "Not money, not favors. Just promise me one thing." She nodded through tears. "When you're in a position to help someone else, do it." She laughed softly, crying. "I already try." "I know. That's why I trust you." An hour later, paperwork signed, hugs exchanged, I watched her pull away carefully, Eli laughing in the passenger seat like this was the biggest adventure of his life. I felt light, at peace. At 4:30, Lydia showed up again, with Marcus this time. They stood in the driveway staring at the empty garage like something sacred had been stolen. In a way, it had. They didn't knock. Marcus and Lydia stood in the driveway like they were bracing for a storm, both staring at the empty space where my car used to sit. Lydia's arms were crossed so tight her shoulders nearly touched her ears. Marcus looked smaller, confused, like a man realizing too late he'd walked into the wrong room. I opened the door before they could pound. "Where is it?" Lydia demanded. I stepped aside just enough to block the doorway. "Gone." Marcus blinked. "Gone how?" I gave it away. The silence that followed was loud, heavy, almost theatrical. "You what?" Lydia laughed, sharp and brittle. "You can't just give it away. That was worth money." "It was mine," I said calmly. "So yes, I can." Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, why would you do that?" "Because someone else needed it more." Lydia scoffed. "Unbelievable. You did this on purpose." "Yes," I said. "I did." Her eyes flashed. "So this is revenge?" "No," I replied. "This is clarity." Marcus stepped forward. "We were counting on that money." "That's the problem," I said gently. "You were counting on something that was never yours." Lydia's voice rose. "Family helps family." I held her gaze. Family doesn't take without asking. Something in her snapped. "You're selfish," she spat. "You've always been selfish. You hoard everything like you're going to take it with you." Marcus turned to her. "Lydia." "No," she cut him off. "You need to hear this. Your mother acts sweet, but she's manipulative. She's doing this to control you." I felt the sting of it, but I didn't flinch. I looked at my son. "Do you believe that?" He hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than her words. "I don't know," he said quietly. That's when I knew. The mask didn't fall off Lydia that day. It slipped off Marcus. "I think you should leave," I said. Lydia laughed again. "Or what?" "Or nothing," I said. "This conversation is over." She leaned closer, eyes sharp. "You think this ends here?" I met her stare. "I know it doesn't." They left in silence. That night, I sat alone again, but this time I wasn't afraid of the quiet, because the truth had finally started to surface, and once it does, it doesn't go back down. That night, I pulled out an old photo album, not the pretty one, the thick, worn one with the cracked spine and loose pages, the one nobody ever flipped through anymore because the memories inside weren't convenient. I sat on the couch, lamp low, and turned the pages slowly. There I was at 39, standing beside a man with tired eyes and work-rough hands, my husband, Marcus's father, gone too early, taken by an accident that paid no apologies and offered no compensation. Next page. Me at 42, holding a coffee mug that read Staff Appreciation Day, smiling even though the rent was late and the fridge was nearly empty. Another page. Marcus at 12, holding a second-hand calculator like it was treasure, the day I told him I couldn't buy him new sneakers but promised him college instead. I kept that promise, every single one. What Marcus never asked, what Lydia never bothered to imagine, was how I survived those years, how I paid for things that didn't show up on spreadsheets, how I learned to be quiet not because I was weak, but because being loud cost too much. I closed the album and rested my hand on top of it. That was when the memory surfaced, clear, sharp. The man next door. His name was Arthur Bell. He moved in when Marcus was 16, an older widower with kind eyes and slow steps. Lived alone, no children, no visitors, just roses he talked to like they were old friends. I helped him with groceries at first, then rides, then doctor visits. Marcus used to mow his lawn for pocket money. They'd sit together afterward, drinking lemonade, talking about baseball and numbers and life. Arthur once told Marcus, "You're a good kid. Your mother raised you right." When Arthur passed years later, there was a quiet funeral. No family showed up, just me. Marcus was working and said he couldn't get off. A week later, a lawyer called. I never told Marcus. Not because I was hiding something, because Arthur asked me not to. "People act different when they think you have something," he'd said. "I want you safe." So I stayed silent, and that silence had protected me until Lydia mistook it for weakness. The next morning, my phone rang early. Marcus. "Mom," he said, voice strained. "Lydia wants to talk, properly this time." I smiled faintly. "Tell her no." "She's my wife, and I'm your mother," I replied. "And right now, I need you to listen instead of negotiate." A pause. "I don't recognize you," he said. "I know," I answered softly. "That's because you never really looked." We hung up. I went to the closet and opened the lockbox again. This time, I took out everything, because if they wanted answers, They were finally ready to hear them. I didn't rush. That was the biggest difference between the woman I used to be and the woman I was becoming. Before, I would have hurried, cleaned house, rehearsed my words, worried about everyone else's feelings before my own. But that morning, I moved slowly, intentionally, like every step mattered. Because it did. I set the dining table for 2, not 3, not peace talks, just truth. At 11 sharp, Marcus arrived alone. No Lydia. That told me more than anything he could have said. He stood in the doorway like a boy waiting to be scolded, not a man facing his mother. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight. He looked tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. "Can I come in?" he asked. "You're already here," I said, stepping aside. He sat where he always used to. Same chair from childhood dinners, the one with the loose leg I never got around to fixing. Funny how some things stay broken simply because no one complains. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he spoke. "She's saying you're trying to control me." I nodded. That's easier than admitting she already does. He flinched. "Mom?" "No," I said gently. "Let me finish. For years I protected you from hardship, from guilt, from knowing how much I gave up so you could have a better life." He looked down at his hands. "I didn't tell you when I skipped meals or when I sold things that mattered to me. I didn't want you to carry that weight." My voice didn't shake. I continued. That protection became a habit, and habits don't disappear just because the situation changes. I stood and brought the lockbox to the table. His eyes followed it. "What's that?" "The part of my life you never asked about." I opened it slowly. I laid out the documents one by one, neatly, clearly, like lesson plans. "This," I said, tapping the first paper, "is a property deed." His brow furrowed. "Where did you get this?" "From a man named Arthur Bell, my neighbor, the one you used to help." His face went pale. "He left me his house years ago." Silence. "And this," I continued, sliding another paper forward, "is a savings account you didn't know existed." He swallowed. "Why didn't you tell me?" I met his eyes. "Because money changes how people see you, and I needed to know who loved me without it." He leaned back, stunned. "All this time," he whispered, "you had—" "Yes," I said, "and I still chose to live simply, to be treated like I was small, to be overlooked." I closed the box. I said, "Lydia thought I had nothing, and you let her." He looked like he'd been struck. "I didn't know," he said hoarsely. "You didn't ask." The truth hung between us, heavy, undeniable. That was the moment I stopped protecting him. Because a man who doesn't ask is a man who doesn't want the answer. Marcus sat there a long time without speaking. The documents lay between us like evidence in a trial neither of us wanted, but both of us needed. His fingers hovered over the edge of the table, not touching anything, like he was afraid the truth might burn him. "You mean you never needed us?" he finally said. The way he said us told me exactly who he meant. "I needed you," I corrected softly. "I just didn't need your money." He let out a shaky breath and leaned back, rubbing his face with both hands. "Lydia she thought you were barely getting by." "I know," I said. "She made sure of it." He looked up sharply. "You think she planned this?" I didn't answer right away, because this was the moment where honesty would hurt more than comfort ever could. "I think," I said slowly, "that she saw what she wanted to see. A quiet older woman, a paid-off house, no obvious income, no pushback. I met his eyes. And I think she believed if she moved fast enough, you'd help her take control before I realized what was happening. His jaw tightened. She wouldn't do that. She already did, I replied. The car, the power plays, the way she spoke to me like I was already fading. He stood abruptly and walked to the window. His hands were shaking now. I could see it even from behind. She says you hate her, he muttered. I don't hate her. I fear what she brings out in you. That landed. He turned back slowly. She says I'm trying to turn you against her. I'm trying to give you your eyes back, I said quietly, so you can see clearly. His voice cracked. Why didn't you stop me sooner? I felt that one deep in my chest. Because every mother hopes her child will figure it out on their own, I said, and because I was afraid if I pushed too hard, I'd lose you completely. He sat again, smaller now, younger. She wants you to apologize, he said, for humiliating her, for giving away the car. I shook my head once. I won't apologize for doing something kind with something that was mine. Silence stretched. What are you going to do now? He asked. I folded my hands in my lap. I've updated my will, my accounts, my boundaries. His eyes widened. Am I? You're still my son, I said gently, but love doesn't mean access. Not anymore. He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't, because for the first time he understood this wasn't a fight. It was a line, and I had finally drawn it. Marcus didn't leave right away. He sat there staring at the table like the wood might offer answers I hadn't. The afternoon light shifted through the window, sliding slowly across the floor, and for the first time in years, I didn't rush to fill the silence. Some silences deserve space. I don't know how to fix this, he finally said. I looked at him, the lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, and realized something painful and freeing at the same time. It's not mine to fix, I said. He nodded, but I could tell that truth hurt him more than any argument would have. She says she embarrassed her, he murmured, that people will talk. I almost smiled. People always talk, Marcus. They talked when I was a widow at 40, when I worked 2 jobs, when I raised you alone. I survived all of it. He swallowed. She's furious. I know. She says she won't come here again unless you apologize. Then she won't come here again. That landed harder than I expected. His shoulders slumped. You're serious? I've never been more serious in my life. He stood slowly, like his body felt heavier than when he arrived. He walked to the door, then stopped with his hand on the knob. I didn't see it, he said quietly. I really didn't. I believe you, but not seeing doesn't erase what happened. He turned to face me. Do you still love me? Always. The word rose in my throat instantly, but I didn't say it that way. I love you enough to stop pretending, I said, and enough to let you learn. His eyes filled, but he nodded. I need time, he said. So do I. He left without another word. That evening, the house felt different. Not empty, settled. I made myself a simple dinner and ate at the table without the TV on. I washed dishes slowly. I watered the plants Marcus once bought me on Mother's Day and never asked about again. Around 9, my phone buzzed. A message from Claire. Eli made it to therapy on time today. He laughed the whole drive. I don't know how to thank you. I set the phone down and closed my eyes. This was what peace felt like. Not loud, not triumphant, just right. Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one. The world kept moving, and for the first time since my retirement, I felt like I wasn't being pushed out of it. I was still here, still choosing, still standing. The days that followed were quiet. Not the uneasy quiet that follows an argument, but the kind that comes after a storm has finally passed and the air feels cleaner than before. I woke up without dread sitting on my chest. I made coffee without checking my phone every 5 minutes. No messages from Lydia, no sudden visits. Marcus called once, late at night, but hung up before I could answer. I didn't call back, not out of spite, out of respect for the space we both needed. 3 days later, the truth started leaking out. It always does. I ran into Mrs. Calder at the pharmacy. She leaned in close, eyes wide, voice low. "Did you hear about your daughter-in-law?" I already knew the answer, but I let her talk. Apparently, she quit her job or got fired, depends who you ask, and your son moved out for a bit, staying with a coworker. I nodded politely. That night, Marcus finally came over. He looked older, not in years, but in awareness, like someone who had just woken up in a life they didn't recognize. "She left," he said simply. I didn't react. "She said I chose you over her, that I betrayed her." I folded my hands in my lap. "And what do you think?" He hesitated, then sighed. "I think I stopped choosing myself a long time ago." That was the first honest thing he'd said in years. He sat down slowly, like he was afraid the ground might give out. "She controlled everything, Mom. My money, my schedule, who I talked to." I listened, not as a rescuer, not as a fixer, just as a witness. "I let her," he whispered, "because it felt easier than arguing." I nodded. It always does at first. He looked at me. "I'm sorry." The words were quiet, unpolished, real. "I know," I said. He stayed for an hour. We talked about nothing important, weather, work, the neighbor's new dog. When he left, he hugged me longer than usual. That hug felt different, not desperate, grateful. After he left, I sat alone again, but the loneliness didn't scare me anymore, because I finally understood something most people learn too late. Standing up for yourself doesn't guarantee applause, it guarantees consequences. But those consequences are often the beginning of peace. Weeks passed. Then a month. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became honest. Marcus started calling every Sunday again, not because he felt obligated, not because someone reminded him. He called because he wanted to hear my voice. Sometimes we talked for 5 minutes, sometimes 40. I never measured it anymore. That's another thing I learned. Love doesn't need to be tracked. Lydia never came back. I heard pieces of her story through the cracks of town gossip. New apartment, new job, new version of the same old cycle. I didn't wish her harm. I also didn't wish her well. I simply released her. Some people don't leave scars. They leave lessons. One afternoon, I walked to the garage and stood in the empty space where my car used to be. The concrete was clean now. Sunlight spilled in through the open door. For the first time, the emptiness didn't feel like loss. It felt like room. Claire stopped by later that day with Eli. He rolled up to me in his wheelchair, grinning ear to ear. "Miss R," he said proudly, "we're never late anymore." I laughed and hugged them both. That night, I sat on my porch wrapped in a light sweater, listening to cicadas hum in the dark. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been: widow, teacher, mother, woman who swallowed too much for too long. I didn't regret loving deeply, but I finally forgave myself for staying silent when I shouldn't have, because silence is useful until it costs you your dignity. I stood up slowly and went inside, locking the door behind me, not out of fear, out of choice. Some endings aren't loud. They don't come with apologies shouted in the rain or dramatic goodbyes on doorsteps. They arrive quietly, like breath returning to your chest after holding it too long. That's how my story ended. One morning, months later, I woke up and realized I wasn't bracing myself for the day anymore. No tight jaw, no rehearsed conversations in my head, just calm. I made coffee and sat by the window as sunlight touched the edges of the room. The house felt lived in again, not managed, not threatened, mine. Marcus came by that afternoon. He didn't announce it ahead of time. He never does now. He knocked, waited, smiled when I opened the door. That still matters. We sat at the table and talked about ordinary things. He told me about work, about cooking for himself, about learning what peace feels like when it isn't negotiated. Before he left, he hugged me, slow and steady. "I'm glad you didn't give in," he said quietly. "So am I replied. After he drove away, I walked through my house one last time that evening, turning off lights, touching familiar walls. I paused in the garage, empty but bright, and smiled. I didn't lose anything. I reclaimed it. And if there's a lesson in all of this, it's a simple one. Being kind doesn't mean being available for abuse. Loving deeply doesn't mean surrendering your dignity. And sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is say no without explaining herself. I turned off the last light. The house went quiet. And for the first time in a very long time, that quiet felt like home. If this story touched something inside you, don't leave quietly. Subscribe, like, and share, because there are more voices like hers that deserve to be heard.